Chris Pronger wasn't just a defenseman, he was a nightmare. Standing 6'6", with a mean streak as sharp as his stick, he bullied superstars, crushed forwards, and talked trash with the confidence of a man who knew he could back up every word. He didn't just finish checks, he erased players. He didn't avoid conflict, he hunted it. Teammates loved him, opponents feared him, and the league never knew which version of Pronger they were getting. The silent destroyer or the full-blown villain ready to settle scores on the spot. But here's the crazy part. Even a monster like Chris Pronger had players who got under his skin. And today we're breaking down the 7 players he hated the most, ranked from least to most hated. If you love the ruthless, old school side of hockey as much as I do, hit that like button because it helps bring these legendary rivalries back to life for fans who miss the true war on ice era. Number 7, Shane Doan. Shane Doan was never the flashiest player, but anyone who watched him knew exactly why Chris Pronger took him seriously. Doan was the heartbeat of the Phoenix Coyotes, a warrior captain who played with grit, humility, and the kind of stubborn competitiveness that made him impossible to intimidate. He wasn't the type to yap or start drama, but when the puck dropped, he transformed into a relentless force who battled for every inch. Pronger respected toughness, and Doan had it in spades. He finished every check, fought through every slash, and stood tall in a league filled with giants. And when he ran into Pronger, literally, it was like watching 2 mountains collide. The Coyotes versus the Blues or Ducks was never a marquee rivalry on paper, but on the ice these games were pure trench warfare. Doan set the tone for Phoenix the same way Pronger did for his teams, and that meant the two were constantly smashing into each other in corners, battling at the crease, and engaging in ugly grinding scrums that refused to end when whistles blew. Every shift between them felt like a test of who would break first, and neither man ever did. Doan kept coming back, shift after shift, like he was trying to prove he wouldn't bow to Pronger's presence. And Pronger, being Pronger, made sure every return trip hurt just a little more than the last. Around the halfway point of their rivalry came the moment fans still talk about. A brutally controversial hit in the neutral zone where both men exploded into each other, sticks flying, gloves dropping instantly. The scrum that followed didn't become a full fight only because the refs tackled Pronger before he could swing. Doan later said, "If you're going to play against him, you better be ready for the pain." And that quote summed up their entire relationship. Grudging respect mixed with genuine animosity. It was one of those rare clashes where 2 captains weren't just leading their teams, they were defending their identities. Ultimately, the Pronger and Doan rivalry represented the essence of old-school Western Conference hockey: physical, painful, and deeply personal. It showcased 2 leaders who refused to back down, 2 players who defined toughness in completely different ways. And even though Doan comes in at number 7 on this list, the battles he had with Pronger helped reinforce the reputation that followed Pronger everywhere. The reputation of a man who destroyed anyone bold enough to challenge him. And if you think Pronger's rivalry with Shane Doan was intense, wait until you see the player who comes next. Number 6, Dustin Brown. Before Dustin Brown was lifting the Stanley Cup as the captain of the Los Angeles Kings, he was known for one thing: hitting everything that moved. Brown came into the league like a human wrecking ball, a fearless young forward who didn't care about reputation, size, or status. If a player was in his lane, he finished the check. If the play looked risky, he drove straight into it. And that attitude put him on a collision course, literally, with Chris Pronger. Brown wasn't intimidated by veterans, and he certainly wasn't intimidated by Pronger, one of the most feared defensemen in NHL history. That alone made Pronger bristle. Young players were supposed to respect the old guard, not charge at them full speed shift after shift. Their rivalry built itself naturally. Every Kings and Ducks matchup turned into a showcase of violent collisions between the rising star and the established enforcer of the blue line. Brown would explode into Pronger in the corners, race toward him on forechecks, and even try to outmuscle him in the open ice, a move that very few dared to attempt. Pronger responded in the same way, raising the physical tone every single time. Every bump Brown delivered was answered with 2 from Pronger, as if he was reminding the kid exactly who ruled the Western Conference. Their battles were constant, gritty, and filled with an underlying tension that made every shift feel like it might erupt. And then came the moment fans still talk about. After one particularly reckless charge, Brown skated back to the bench, only to hear Pronger's voice cut through the noise. "You're gonna get hurt playing like that." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, the kind only a veteran predator gives to a young challenger. Brown didn't back down, of course, but the message was clear. Pronger didn't like being targeted, especially by someone who hadn't yet earned his stripes. That single exchange added gasoline to their feud and instantly became part of league lore. What made this rivalry special was what it symbolized. Brown represented the next generation, a new breed of fast, physical, fearless forwards trying to take over the game. Pronger represented the old guard, bigger, meaner, and determined to keep the crown. Their clashes weren't just hits, they were declarations of war between eras. And while Brown eventually became a respected leader in his own right, he never managed to push Pronger off the throne in their head-to-head battles. But if Dustin Brown was the next generation trying to overthrow the king, the next rival on this list didn't just challenge Pronger, he went toe-to-toe with him in a way that made every clash feel like a battlefield. Number 5. Keith Tkachuk. Keith Tkachuk was built for war, a true power forward in every sense. He combined goal-scoring ability with a bruising, punishing style that made him one of the most feared competitors of his era. He wasn't just willing to go into the dirty areas, he lived there. Tkachuk thrived on physical chaos, throwing hits, chirping non-stop, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to stand in front of him. And when Phoenix went up against St. Louis, that attitude put him directly in the path of Chris Pronger. These two weren't just big, they were violent, proud, and completely unwilling to back down. Every time Tkachuk went near the net, Pronger was waiting. Every time Pronger carried the puck, Tkachuk tried to flatten him. It was a rivalry that felt personal even when it wasn't. Their clashes were some of the most physical of the late 90s and early 2000s. Tkachuk wasn't scared of Pronger like so many others were. He talked back, he hit back, and he pushed back hard. Phoenix and St. Louis games were guaranteed to get nasty, and it was usually Tkachuk and Pronger dragging the teams into the mud. They collided along the boards with the kind of force that made arena glass shake. They hacked each other in front of the net like lumberjacks, and every whistle seemed to end with a shove, a glare, or a word, meant to spark something bigger. Then came the moment fans still replay anytime these two names get brought up. In one unforgettable game, Tkachuk caught Pronger with a massive open ice hit, one of the very few times anyone ever put Pronger on his back. The arena erupted. Pronger sprang up like he had been insulted, not hit, and went straight for Tkachuk. Gloves flew, bodies tangled, and the entire game spiraled into a near-line brawl because two of the league's toughest players refused to let the other win even a single moment. That collision became part of Pronger's rivalry mythology, not because he lost the battle, but because it was one of the only times someone was bold enough to truly challenge him head-on. What made this rivalry unforgettable was how it embodied everything old-school hockey fans love. Size versus size, pride versus pride, violence versus violence. Tkachuk and Pronger didn't need theatrics. Their hatred was expressed through bone-rattling hits and battles of pure will. And even though both men ended up with bruises, cuts, and stories from these encounters, they also walked away with something rare, mutual respect forged in warfare. But if people thought Tkachuk brought out Pronger's nastiest side, the next player pushed those emotions into an entirely different category. One where the rivalry wasn't just physical, but deeply personal. Number 4, Brendan Shanahan. Brendan Shanahan was the kind of player who could take over a game with sheer force. Detroit's powerhouse forward brought a rare combination of elite scoring touch and a bruising, confrontational style that made him one of the most complete wingers of his era. He didn't just score goals, he imposed his will. Shanahan could fight heavyweights, play 25 hard minutes, and still bury the game winner. And that made him one of the few players who could go toe-to-toe with Chris Pronger, physically, emotionally, and competitively. When St. Louis and Detroit met, it wasn't just a hockey game, it was the collision of two alpha predators, each trying to claim control over the ice. Their rivalry fully ignited during the Blues and Red Wings playoff wars of the late 90s and early 2000s. These were battles filled with high stakes, bad blood, and unforgettable violence. Every shift between them looked like two titans testing the limits of the human body. Shanahan drove hard to the net, and Pronger punished him for daring to enter his territory. Pronger carried the puck through the neutral zone, and Shanahan tried to flatten him. They traded hits that would be suspensions in today's game. They chirped relentlessly. And they played each collision like it might change the series because sometimes it did. The hatred wasn't theatrical. It was real. It was earned. And fans could feel it radiating off the ice. Then came the moment that poured gasoline on the fire. In one heated matchup, Pronger delivered a crushing high hit on Shanahan. One so brutal, it earned him a suspension and instantly became one of the most replayed highlights of their rivalry. Shanahan, furious and unshaken, came back in the next game hunting Pronger with the kind of determination that only true rivalry produces. At one point, the two dropped their gloves, grappling in a wild, chaotic struggle that felt less like a hockey fight and more like two warriors settling a debt. It was the defining turning point, the moment everyone realized this wasn't just competitive tension, this was personal. The impact of this rivalry shaped both players and the rivalry between their teams. Shanahan pushed Pronger into becoming nastier, tougher, and even more ruthless. Pronger responded by raising the physical temperature of every game, turning Blues versus Wings into must-watch warfare. Their clashes weren't just memorable, they defined an era of punishing Western Conference hockey, where star players didn't hide from the violence, they created it. And as intense as the battles with Shanahan were, the next rivalry on this list brought an entirely different flavor, one filled with trash talk, ego, and a hatred that felt almost radioactive. Number 3, Jeremy Roenick. Jeremy Roenick was one of the NHL's great entertainers, a rare mix of elite skill, explosive skating, and a personality bigger than the arenas he played in. He scored highlight reel goals, delivered big hits, and loved nothing more than getting under people's skin. Roenick chirped everyone, rookies, veterans, stars, coaches, referees. No one was safe, and that made him a natural enemy for Chris Pronger, who had zero patience for mouthy forwards. Roenick played loud, Pronger played violent. Put them on the same sheet of ice, and you didn't just get hockey, you got a psychological war. Roenick's swagger and Pronger's fury clashed instantly, and the rivalry that formed was one of the most unforgettable of their era. Their battles were a perfect storm of personality and punishment. Roenick never stopped talking, especially when he sensed he could throw Pronger off his game. He taunted him after whistles, jabbed him with his stick, and made sure his comments found their way into the media. Pronger responded with brutality, monster hits, crushing cross-checks, and a look in his eyes that could freeze a room. Flyers versus Blues, Coyotes versus Blues, Blackhawks versus Ducks. No matter the jersey, the tension was always the same. Every time Roenick carried the puck into Pronger's zone, fans leaned forward because everyone knew something violent or hilarious was about to happen. Then came the moment that permanently cemented their feud in NHL history. In one explosive game, Roenick came skating through the middle, and Pronger absolutely leveled him with a devastating open ice hit that fans still replay to this day. Roenick, never one to back down, popped up and famously snapped, "If he wants to hit me like that again, he'd better make sure I stay down." It was Roenick's boldest challenge and Pronger's most savage response, and it pushed their already toxic rivalry into legendary status. That hit wasn't just physical, it became a symbol of the unstoppable force versus immovable trash talker dynamic that made their clashes so addictive. Roenick brought out something different in Pronger, something darker, sharper, and more controlled. Against Roenick, Pronger didn't just hit harder, he stalked, targeted, and punished strategically, almost as if proving that no amount of chirping could save Roenick from the consequences. It was a rivalry built on ego, toughness, and pride, and fans still talk about it because it captured everything raw and chaotic about that era of hockey. And if Roenick awakened Pronger's most ruthless instincts, the next rivalry took things even further, pushing the tension to the edge of absolute chaos. Number 2, Patrick Roy. Patrick Roy wasn't just a goaltender, he was a firestorm in pads. Emotional, unpredictable, fiercely competitive, and armed with a volcanic temper, Roy could change the atmosphere of a game with a single glare. He chirped, he taunted, he played mind games better than any goalie in the league. And Chris Pronger, a man who thrived on intimidation and psychological dominance, found in Roy a rival who refused to be bullied. Every time their teams met, it felt less like a matchup and more like two unstable elements colliding. Roy guarded his crease like a king defending a throne, and Pronger, never one to respect boundaries, loved barging straight into that territory. Their rivalry wasn't defined by simple physicality, it was built on chaos. Screens turned into shoves, slashes turned into scrums, behind the net bumps turned into screaming matches between two of the league's most explosive personalities. Pronger's job was to make Roy's night miserable, and Roy's job was to let Pronger know he wasn't afraid of him. They poked, pushed, chopped, and shouted at each other constantly. When Pronger stood in front of the crease, Roy slammed his stick into the back of his legs. When Roy wandered out to play the puck, Pronger accidentally clipped him on the way by. It was hockey hostility at its purest form, not pretty, not polite, but unforgettable. And then came the moment every fan remembers, the night when tensions nearly erupted into a full-blown fight. Roy, frustrated after repeated screens and bumps, charged out of his crease and went chest to chest with Pronger. Goalie mask pressed into Pronger's visor as they screamed inches from each other's faces. Players swarmed in instantly, but not before Roy swung his blocker hand toward Pronger's chest, and Pronger cocked his stick like he was ready to retaliate, and the arena nearly exploded. Commentators were stunned. It was the kind of moment that didn't just define a game, it defined a rivalry. From that night forward, anytime the two legends shared the ice, fans waited for the next eruption. This rivalry was more than entertainment. It was a clash of two volcanic forces who ignited every time they crossed paths. Roy's emotional fire met Pronger's cold, punishing brutality, creating moments that still circulate in highlight reels decades later. It became legendary because neither man backed down, Neither man apologized, and neither man forgot a single slight. And if Wah was the fire that tested Pronger's control, the final rival on this list pushed Pronger into battles that were bigger, heavier, and more unforgettable than anything before. The one player he hated more than anyone else. Number 1, Steve Yzerman. Steve Yzerman was everything Chris Pronger wanted to destroy on the ice. He was the ultimate leader, but the face of Detroit's dynasty. A captain who combined elegance with steel. Yzerman didn't chirp, didn't posture, didn't need theatrics. He simply played at a level so high and so consistent that he carried the respect of the entire league. And that made him the perfect target for Pronger, who despised nothing more than players who refused to be intimidated. Yzerman was the heart of the Red Wings machine, the steady force behind their dominance. And every time St. Louis or Anaheim lined up across from Detroit, Pronger circled him like a shark. This wasn't personal hatred, it was competitive obsession. Pronger wanted to break the Wings, and Yzerman was the key piece he had to crack. The battles between them were forged in the fires of the most intense playoff series of the late 90s and early 2000s. Every shift was a war zone. Pronger hammered Yzerman in the corners, slashed him in front of the net, and targeted him with the kind of precision he reserved only for the league's most dangerous players. Yzerman never backed down, not once. He absorbed hits that would fold lesser players, got up without complaint, and skated right back into the fight. Pronger hated that. He was used to opponents avoiding his lane, altering their routes, or bracing for impact. Yzerman skated straight through Pronger's territory like he didn't care who stood there. Their collisions became the backbone of the Blues and Wings rivalry, raw, violent, and loaded with playoff tension. Then came the moment every fan still debates. In a crucial meeting between the two teams, Pronger delivered a crushing hit on Yzerman, a borderline shot that sent the Detroit captain sprawling, and sparked an instant eruption from both benches. Some called it clean, some called it dirty. Some still insist it changed the momentum of the entire series. Yzerman, dazed but unbroken, got up and finished the game while Pronger stood over him with the cold, unblinking stare that defined his career. That hit became the heartbeat of their rivalry, the unforgettable flashpoint fans replay whenever the Blues and Wings history is mentioned. What made Yzerman the number one rival wasn't hatred in the emotional sense. It was the fact that Pronger simply couldn't intimidate him. No matter how hard he hit, how much he slashed, how angry he got, Yzerman never flinched, never changed, never showed fear. He was the one opponent Pronger couldn't mentally break. And that, more than any fight or feud, made him the player Chris Pronger hated battling the most. And with this final rivalry revealed, the full picture of Pronger's war-filled career comes into focus. A legacy built on violence, pride, and the 7 players who pushed him to his absolute limit. These rivalries weren't just hockey matchups. They were battles that shaped an era. Chris Pronger's career was defined by bruises, grudges, and the relentless drive to dominate anyone who dared cross his path. From young wrecking balls to legendary captains, every rival on this list pushed him harder and carved their own place in the story of one of the NHL's most intimidating forces. Pronger didn't just play the game, he waged war inside it. And these 7 players were the ones who forced him to fight his fiercest battles, physically and mentally, night after night. But now it's your turn. Which rivalry do you think burned the hottest? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that like button to keep hockey history alive, and don't forget to subscribe for more hard-hitting stories from the golden age of the NHL. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next game. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more insane hockey stories, forgotten feuds, and career-defining battles coming your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's next.